going to record this webinar so that we can share it online later. So please take note that I will now record this seminar. Okay, again, welcome to this Siri Seminar Academic PPSK 2026. Today, we are very honored to have two guest speakers. Let me introduce them. The first one is Dr. Aizuddin Anwar. He is assistant professor at the Academy of Future Education at Sian Jiao Tong Liverpool University, and he's a scholar of comparative and international education. He's interested in various themes under the umbrella of education and international development, as well as national development. And Aizuddin received his PhD in education from the University of Oxford, where he was a Clarendon Scholar and doctoral teaching fellow there. His first book, Postcolonial Education and Development in Peripheral Malaysia, Building Scientific Aspirations, is forthcoming in September 2026 from Bristol University Press. So please look out for it. It's going to come up in September later this year. And then our second speaker is Zikri Rahman. Rahman is an old friend of mine. We have been working together for a long time. So Zikri has been is currently the program coordinator with Pusat Sejarah Rakyat, which is also Pusat Sejarah Rakyat is also the co-organizer of today's webinar. So Zikri is the program coordinator with Pusat Sejarah Rakyat, or PSR in short. And he is an independent archival researcher. He documented his documentation focusing on Malaysia and Singapore's people's history. Zikri is also a writer, a translator, an independent researcher, and a curator with a Master of Arts in Social Research and Cultural Studies from National Yang Ming Chiao Tung University, Taiwan, which is also my alma mater. And through multiple projects and selected publications, Zikri dwells into oral history of Malaysia's protest movements, critical pedagogy, art and cultural movement or intervention, regional-based censorship documentation to the networks of theatre practitioners in the interracial context. His works can be accessed through his own website. Perhaps Zikri will share with us later his own website. So let me stop sharing this and invite the two speakers to share with us their research. So the topic of their presentation today is Suara Perkembangan. For those, if you have noticed, Suara Pembangunan, sorry, the Pembangunan is bracketed with brackets, which looks like the wave of sound. So sound can also be visualized in this way. And so and the main theme is actually about education via family memories of national development through this Suara Pembangunan, or the voice of development in Malaysia. And so let me pass the mic to our two speakers. Perhaps Aizuddin starts first, or Zikri starts first.
I'll start.
I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to share the screen,
Okay.
and then I'll pass to Zikri to
Okay.
start the sharing. Let me see.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your kind introduction, and of course to School of Social Science USM for the opportunity to be part of the Siri Seminar Academic PPSK 2026. So I think for this particular project, we're going to share more about our ongoing project, actually, Suara Pembangunan, a sonic history of national development in Malaysia. As mentioned by Paul earlier, I'm Zikri. I'm the project coordinator affiliated with Pusat Sejarah Rakyat. And together in this project is Dr. Aizuddin. So for this first phase of the presentation, I'll talk briefly about the contextualization of the project, as well as the research questions that actually anchoring our exploration with our diverse 6 collaborators, Nadia, Yvonne, Kalash, Junhong, Alena, and Hui Ting, in producing their own audio essays that touches on multiple dynamic of developmentalism in Malaysia. So moving forward to the next slide. So through this presentation, we're going to explore on how young people in Malaysia actually narrate the ideas of national development through family memory, oral history, and sound-based practices. The project is actually funded by Kils University Faculty Research Fund, of which Dr. Aizudin affiliated with before, and developed together with Pusat Sejarah Rakyat. So at its core, this particular presentation asks a simple but important question. How do young people actually narrate the history of national development in Malaysia through non-formal approaches that combines oral history and sound practice in their community within the family themselves? So maybe it's good for me to contextualize this particular project by situating the case of Malaysia as a developmental state, where we attempt to highlight the outcome of this participatory project on oral history and sound practice by centering generational legacies of national development in Malaysia. As we are aware, Malaysia is often described as an upper middle income country shaped by a strong developmental state, as observed by sociologists of development, Prof. Abdurrahman Embong, of which I would love to quote at length so that it can actually provide an apt contextualization. So, helmed by a national elite committed to a strong sense of nationalism and urgency for nation building, with economic development as its top priority goal, as a means for national self-empowerment and to project itself internationally. The role of development ideology in mobilizing the various forces in society for development and as a basis for state legitimacy should not be understated. So this particular quote by Prof. Abdurrahman Embong actually provide the context for this particular project, where education is not merely about knowledge acquisition or economic mobility. It is also deeply implicated in the process of nation building and state formation. And it actually tried to seek or try to legitimize itself across successive moments of state formation since the formation of the independence of Malaya, 1957, to the formation of Malaysia in 1963, particularly from the ideas or the development ideology of the country, which heavily reflected through the new economic policy, which actually had its significant implication into the present day of Malaysia. So also, continuing on that trajectory, as mentioned by Professor Lau, you also mentioned about how education also perform socio-political and cultural functions, where it helps to construct the ideas of citizenship, cultivate national identity, and reproduce dominant narrative about progress and development, of which we try to unravel through this particular project. So specifically in the Malaysian context, the state official narrative of nation building and citizenship, espoused through history education, has undergone distinct periods of development. So I think, as mentioned by Professor Helen Ting in her essay, Historical Narrative and National Identity in Lower Secondary History Textbook in Malaysia, actually there's 3 different periodization that we have to able to understand. So for the first one, the first period is during the Malaya or Malaysia in the world history, which happened between the period of 1959 to 1977. And then the second period is like the Malay-centric multicultural narrative happening from 1978 to 1988. And the last period is the ethno-Malay nationalist narrative from 1989 to the present day. So in this particular project, most of the young people that we are engaging with in this project were educated between this particular third period from 1989 to present. So the ideas of ethno-Malay nationalist narrative is very much embedded. It foregrounds the Malay origins of the state formation at the expense of the non-Malay ethnic groups' contribution, which are unfortunately being relegated to the periphery. So from this particular process or periodization that I mentioned, we can see the process of development are far from being neutral, actually. So official narratives tend to emphasize on the ideas of economic growth, modernization, and national unity, but it often obscure more complex realities such as migration histories, ethnic inequalities, and the uneven social impacts of development, of which Aizuddin will share more later through our collaborators' audio essay. So in Malaysia, this tension is particularly evident, for example, in the aftermath of the 1969 racial riots and the introduction of, for example, the new economic policy. So although these interventions through economic policy actually reshape the ideas of economic redistribution, but it also raised an enduring questions, particularly on citizenship, belonging, and ethno-national hierarchies. So as you can observe, as a result of that, national development is not just an economic process, it is also deeply a contested historical narrative of which we found from this particular project. Moving forward to the next slide. So at this point, it is important because I did mention about the periodization on how history or formal learning process are being espoused through different period of time. But it is also important to move beyond the assumption that education happens only within formal institution. So here, a non-formal education provides a generative space of which we try to critically consider the potential to engage with question of national development and citizenship. The question is, how do we actually do that through this particular project? So I did mention several times on how this particular project foregrounds non-formal and intergenerational learning, because the idea would be for the family, and our participants, our collaborator, where it enables deeper appreciation of a particular topic, the exchange of knowledge that happens between the conversation in the family, and how does those kind of perspective being shared across generation, and hopefully there's a deep reflection that happens between our collaborators and the listeners between the question of identity and belief being transmitted through the audio essay. So, drawing on the work of German-based scholar Astrid R., we can understand families as what she defined as mnemonic communities, spaces where memory is being produced, transmitted, and negotiated within the wider social landscape and infrastructure. So, through this particular project, we can observe that multiple narrative of socialization actually being discussed, being proposed, especially if we're going to take into account what happened, for example, after 13 May. What sort of migration occurs and displacement, what sense of citizenship thrive between different generational conversation within the family. So within these sort of spaces, within this sort of exploration through this particular project, personal stories are never purely individual. They are embedded within a broader political and cultural narrative, including those shaped by the state. So it's not a one-way street where state impose the ideas of how development actually can be narrated. In here, we can observe that it's a two-way street, and hopefully it will be, like I mentioned earlier, a generative space for conversation, for further conversation. So here, the family memory also becomes a crucial site where official histories can be both reproduced, contested, and challenged. Moving forward to the next slide. And from the outline or the context that I mentioned earlier, it actually brings us to the central research questions guiding this project? How do young people actually narrate the story of national development in Malaysia through the fusion of oral history and sound practice in their community? Moving to the next slide. So, Suara Pembangunan, in a way, is designed or was designed as a response to this question. Of course, throughout the process of ideation process for this particular project, we survey relevant literature and related project to national development, non-formal education, and intergenerational learning. And from there, we actually engage and outline how methodology can be innovative for this particular project, because we want to capture different nuances of development, particularly through sound practices. So moving forward to the next slide. So as you can see, there's like 5 different period that we actually explore together with our collaborators. So this particular project involved 6 young people aged between 25 to 31 as of in the year of 2024, who took part in a workshop focused on oral history methods and sound production. So given this was a pilot project and limited by funding, so there's only 6 participants who were chosen. And of course, there's a lot of like very extensive participation as well. So that's the reason why it's only 6 participants, and we are thinking of actually exploring it further in the future. So of course, in the second part, after the workshop, our participant actually conducted interviews with identified family members on the changing landscape of national development across generation, focusing on the topic of their choice. So most of the topic that has been covered through the audio essays is actually being proposed through the open call that we organize with the participants. So our role as a collaborator, as the organizer of the project, is really to have a conversation, to have a dialogue with our participants when they actually produce short multilingual audio essays, where they actually explore the ideas of voice recordings, ambient sound, and archival elements in this particular audio essay project, of which we're going to listen afterwards through when Aizudin share it later. So from this particular 6 audio essay, 1 audio essay was narrated in Malay, while the other 5 were narrated in English. Among the latter, 4 also included dialogue in Hakka, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Tamil, with accompanying English translation. So methodologically, the project draws from the ideas of like memory studies, participatory research, and post-colonial approaches to the ideas of development. And most importantly, this particular workshop or the project shift attention away from visual representation of development, something that we can actually observe with our eyesight, for example, but then instead it foregrounds sound as a fundamental medium of storytelling. So after the participants actually produce their audio essay, Azuddin and I then actually organize a couple of different interviews, individual interviews with all of our participants to have a conversation about the whole process, of which I do believe that they actually provide more a reflective kind of process, which actually affect the way we understood the sonic essay that the participant produced. From here, through sound, participants not only able to capture not just the events actually, but also the atmosphere, emotion, and live experience when they actually have the conversation with their family members. So from the interviews that we organize with our participants, we listen to it repeatedly just to ensure that we can appreciate the sonic choices made by the participants, because the narrative is quite broad. People talking about different kind of idea, but how do they actually distill the idea through the sonic, through the sound that they actually choose, because that's where the details and the nuances of their conversation, their experience actually comes about. And I think maybe that's it from me in contextualizing and try to propose the basic ideas of the project with everyone. Maybe I would love to then invite Jude to elaborate further on our key findings of the project. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Zikri. So I'm going to take over to discuss more of the analysis of our participants' audio essays, as well as their reflections on their learning after they produce their audio essays. So I'm going to talk through a number of different themes. First, starting with a theme which we term as citizenship and education. So this particular theme is largely reflected in 4 of the audio essays where family participants describe family experiences of Chinese and Indian migration across Malaya and Malaysia's post-colonial divide, and in so doing, raising questions of belonging and inherited identities. Here, participants are reflecting on family members' previous histories of migration in the aftermath of or during the process of British colonization as part of the development of the colonial capitalist economy. And largely, the familial stories that were highlighted by the participants reflect a range of what we call neglected narratives of migration, which were crucial for the development of Malaya and Malaysia's economy, although perhaps not necessarily foregrounded as such. And also, as a result of that, the production of Malaysia's post-colonial multi-ethnic society. So in our project, the audio essays highlight the movement of peoples within Peninsular Malaysia, as well as across transnationally across what we today consider to be very firm national borders. And these movements generally raise questions about the kind of sacrifices and the distances that people make in the name of development or in the process of developing Malaysia. So first, we would like to share an audio essay by one of our participants, Kailash, who narrates the journeys in his audio essay of his uncle, his grandmother, and his grandfather on Indian Ocean liners between South India and Malaya before the prevalence of air travel in the 1960s. And through his audio essay, he invites the listeners to accompany his family on this voyage by evoking the sounds of what it's like to be on one of these massive Indian Ocean liners that traveled across the sea. So let me see if I can play this. Hopefully it works and you can hear a sense of what the audio essay sounds like in Kailash's narration.
My grandfather, P. Gopinatha Menon, migrated to Malaya during the late 1940s in search of better opportunities. Like many other South Indians, he was employed in the colonial plantation economy. To facilitate the modern mass migration of Indians, and before the boom of airlines in the 1970s, ships were the transport of choice. For my grandparents, commercial passenger ships like the SS Rajula, State of Madras, and Chidambaram were lifelines connecting them to their motherland. But what was it like to travel by sea in the 1960s? How much does a ticket cost? How long do these journeys last? What were the conditions on these ships? These stories are almost lost in service of a convenient mythology of Malaysia. Imagine being on the deck of the SS Rajula, a 9,000-ton steamship, leaving behind the familiar shores of Madras, with nothing but the horizon ahead.
I've come back to Malaysia while I was studying in India, on vacation. I've taken flights at Madras. That was one of 3 ships actually. First was State of Madras, then Regula, and then Chidambaram, the last one. I'm taking.
So that's just a sample of part of one of the audio essays produced by our participants, Kailash. And together, the audio essays under this theme of citizenship bring together stories that relay how families travel across borders inside and outside of Malaya to make a life for themselves and to contribute to the project of building a new nation, either in plantations or on railway tracks and other economic sectors. Nevertheless, the contemporary demarcation of citizenship in the country distinguishes often through narratives in the public of the idea of the native and also the migrant population, with different claims to citizenship that continue to raise questions about what it means to live in a multi-ethnic society such as Malaysia. So another aspect of the theme that we identified through the work of our participants is the question of how education is related to the idea of national development. And here, two of the audio essays speak to this particular theme of how education is related not only to the notion, related to development through both social mobility as well as influencing linguistic identity. So now I want to share an audio essay by our other participant, Yvonne, who narrates the experience of being lost among different languages which are not inherited in her family. In her dialogue with her mother in a mix of English and Cantonese, she recounted the socialization effects of language proficiency while she attended a national school or a sekolah kebangsaan. So I'm going to play that essay.
同人佢哋講我話我 banana 我唔識講 ，then 我好唔係激心 difficult 啊 difficult how to say difficult 艱難呀好艱難同朋友講呀 then 佢哋唔會同我講。So I have to, be 朋友 with Indian and Malay people because they won't make fun of me.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because last time I didn't know that. I thought that as you go to school, you can learn from school. This is what your father said. Your dad says, oh, you can learn in school. So friends, since childhood, you already speak English.
So Yvonne's audio essay essentially highlights the kind of intra-racial identity among, here in this case, Malaysian Chinese communities, which are fractured along linguistic lines, which led her then to feel isolated among Chinese peers in her school due to her inability to speak Mandarin. In her audio essay, she also then related this very personal experience to the wider history of language policy within education in Malaya and Malaysia, which led to the kind of cultural choices among her extended family members on whether to send their children to primary school with Malay or with Mandarin as the medium of instruction. So we can see how some of these stories are not just personal stories, but are embedded within larger policies of development along the lines of education in this case. So, the next theme that I want to talk about is how memory then functions as a pedagogical tool, where the participants are able to use memory as a tool of learning. And in this case, I want to highlight another participant, Nadia, who shared how in working in this project enabled her to revisit the memories that have been circulating in her family while she was younger. So the topic that she explored was stories that were perhaps already been circulating or spoken in her family, but the production of her own audio essay then enabled her to have a tangible record of those circulating discussions, in Nadia's case, about her family's involvement or movement in different parts of the country because her grandfather worked with the royal family or with the keluarga diraja. So by participating in this project, the participants were then able to uncover perhaps new, more detailed, and in some cases quite emotionally charged dimensions of family stories of development, which were inherited across generations, and also enabled them to help clarify some of the confusions or inconsistencies in those memories which they had. Now, another dimension of how participants learn through memory is the notion of how memory become what we call containers for posterity. This is how memory then not only shapes questions about the past, but also provides uh, sources of information and knowledge for the future. And this helps participants not only to have a record of how development has influenced them, but also potentially use that record as part of further intergenerational learning down the line. So here, another participant, Elena, says how she hopes that one day her nieces and nephews or her own children and grandchildren can listen to the stories that her mum had told her about the time when she grew up around the time of the Konfrontasi movement in Sarawak, and how the village or the kampung has changed over time, and that there is a change in also population makeup in the area where her mother is from. And she was able to use the opportunity to make this audio essay as a way of capturing a particular moment in Malaysia's history through the family of her mother's story of going through the process of being educated, which then helps to develop her family through more intergenerational mobility. So we can think of most of the young people's participation, as I mentioned before, as embedding the work of memory within larger official narratives of national development, and how the participants can therefore see themselves as intertwined in much more larger macro historical processes. Many of the participants in our project linked their family stories to larger narratives of national development. For instance, Hui Ting captured her grandfather's life in the crossfires of the racial riots of 13 May in Kuala Lumpur, as well as her family living in the government's low-cost public housing project. Elena's mother grew up within the geopolitical backdrop of the Konfrontasi movement between Malaysia and Indonesia. And Jun Hong highlighted how his grandparents lived in settlements as part of the New Village program to curb the communist influence during the sunset of the British Empire in Malaysia. So participating in this project therefore has enabled young Malaysians to see themselves and their families as not just witnesses of history, but also storytellers of that larger narrative of national development. As they are crafting their audio essays, they therefore help to build what we call a counter narrative that interrupts the facade of power in mainstream accounts of national development. And here, Hui Ting therefore provides a kind of what we consider to be a very good encapsulation of what we are trying to do with this project, where she reflects after producing her audio essay about how most of the time we read about other people's family history. And these are oftentimes big figures, people who are considered to be important as part of the national narrative. But it's nice to be able to work in this audio essay because she also wanted to hear the narratives of her family and how national development has affected them. She says, because usually when you read it in the books or when you watch the news, it's just the government is doing this and that. And the contributions are oftentimes framed in terms of numbers or percentage of people in poverty or such things. But when you hear these stories from people on the ground, the reality of development is much different, much more complex compared to these numbers and figures that are oftentimes presented at the macro level. So she finds that engaging in this project is giving her family voice to also narrate the stories of national development in Malaysia. So in terms of the overall reflections of this project, we consider that listening carefully to the narratives of their family members, the young people who participated in this project, also learn and teach us about the ideas of citizenship and belonging reflected to a number of themes such as migration and how education is related to the promises of social mobility and how education affects one's linguistic identity. We argue that working through the sound element actually enhances the vividness or the affective dimensions of their narratives. And working through narrative in this way aligns with what scholars call how stories about the personal past, when done artfully, show why the mediating work of memory and narrative, far from necessarily obscuring reality, can reveal it and through this revelation redefine it. So there is a place for creative work to help us understand the function and the purpose of memory as part of reflecting reality. So when the young people in this project work with their family memory as part, it enabled them to appreciate their place in history and also their own capability to lend their voice to enrich the overall narrative of national development. Therefore, aligning our work within the field of memory studies, it affirms what the scholar Astrid Earle argues, that it is through the study of family memory that the actual multi-voiced processes of remembering the nation become discernible. The study of family memory can thus serve as an important corrective to the approach taken by those who chart purist sites of national memory. So we argue that therefore this project serves as a kind of pedagogical function for our participants to create a temporary experimental site of non-formal education in order to produce these counter narratives of development. And the methodology that we have developed in this study actually is quite aligned with much more other global principles of transformative education. For instance, such as UNESCO's recommendation on education for peace, human rights, and sustainability, particularly through the principles of dialogue and encouraging co-creation of knowledge across generations, and also utilizing what we call a participatory approach. Therefore, in terms of the overall contribution of this work, we situate this methodology as a kind of way to extend the scholarship at the intersection of education and memory studies, which has so far mainly focused on formal education within schools, such as through history curriculum and things of that sort. So I'll stop here, and I look forward to having a dialogue with the attendees. And thank you so much for your time. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Thank you, Aizuddin, and thank you, Zikri, for such a rich, beautiful, and powerful presentation, which is really deeply touching. Before this webinar, I actually went back to PSR's website to listen back to those recording, and I got really emotional when I was listening to them. You know, it was really voices can be very emotive, and perhaps because of that, it can be very effective for pedagogical purpose as well. And I'm so glad that at the very beginning, Zikri also explained a little bit, kind of like juxtapose this project with, you know, the larger trend out there, because over the last decade, there seems to be a so-called visual turn in social sciences. People tend to look at visual, you know, what visual was like, you know, everyday life, you know. But then your project actually focuses on sonic, and then by using the method of oral history, and which is associated with memory, which I think very, very important. So perhaps let me open the floor up for Q&A now. Any questions for the two panelists here? And let me add one more point. Actually, this morning I was attending another seminar organized by Kanita, which is a women's research center. And the topic happens to be feminist epidemiology and also feminist methodology, which also closely related, align very well with your talk today about voices, because feminists, they use a lot of oral history method as well, in-depth interview, oral history. So and listening to voices, and voices literally meaning, you know, style and voices, but at the same time, sometimes voices also is also a word that means perspective. We need to look at different perspective. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just so glad that I have this opportunity to listen to two very good seminars today. So let me open the floor up. Any questions for the panelists? Or any comments? Or you can write in the chat box if you like, or you open your mic to ask any question, or you can use your raise hand icon. Maybe the presentation is just too rich and people are still digesting and processing. Yeah, and I have perhaps let me start with one question. I'm just wondering, because some of my research project are also dealing with oral history, voices, and memories. And then I have been trying to make sense as well, how to, in terms of methodology, for some societies, people really rely on oral tradition and oral history to transmit knowledge or even pass down history rather than through texts such as textbook or readings, because not every culture or community relies on written text. Some, they really rely on oral history. But then I think these are two very different forms of knowledge and memory. For textualized memories, once textualized, it becomes, the form becomes more kind of like rigid. But then voices kind of like different. And I wonder, what is the influence of recorded memory on the self of the narrator and on the memory itself? Because when we narrate memories, we could be sometimes we could be changing our narrative, but once it is textualized, it seems to be like very different. So do you have any observation in your own research regarding how recorded memory, the impact of recorded memory on the narrator themselves and on memory itself?
That's like a very big question. Maybe I can try to I can try to first attempt it, and then I'll pass to Zikri to give his thoughts. This is a very important question because it also sometimes raises the another question, which is the distinction between memory and history, right? Oftentimes, historical knowledge become codified through textual kind of representations. That becomes more stable, whereas memories are changing, or as they move across generations, they might be sometimes even embellished or kind of romanticized in ways that make memory, therefore, in some instances, considered to be less reliable sources or accounts of history. So I think there is maybe perhaps a caution here, particularly I think among historians. I mean, I myself am not a historian, but among historians who are slightly skeptical of the place of memory as a way of kind of constructing history. But having said that, I think among people who work in memory studies, it is quite acknowledged that memory is a constructed thing, that memory, as it moves across different generations, change and mutate, and also kind of in some ways surprise the person who holds the memory or receives the memory. So I think it's also quite challenging to consider how memory might be, in terms of its oral form, quite unstable sources of knowledge. I mean, sources of knowledge nonetheless, I think, but perhaps always need to be corroborated with other sources of making knowledge through history. And in our project, at least, we are really trying to see how memory and history can be brought together. So that's why when our participants produce their audio essays, we are always encouraging them to situate these memories within broader historical kind of patterns and trends to see how those things might kind of bump up against each other. Sometimes it might be contradictory. Sometimes it's like neatly placed within what we already know about certain histories of development. But yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I don't know if we have like a very clear answer. Zikri?
Yeah, maybe
Zikri,
just
please.
to add on that, I think, yeah, of course, it's a very big question, but maybe I would love to draw it back to the project itself, the production that we have. For example, even within the period of sharing the stories, intergenerational stories and whatnot, I think we are also aware that, for example, like for some of like maybe in the previous generation, they tend to read more in Jawi, for example, but then now it's being Romanized and everything. So even within the so-called textual memory or textual production also changing from time to time, and it actually leave a huge gap between on how people perceive certain things within their own surrounding. So that's one thing, because for example, maybe for those people in the previous generation who actually access most of the news by reading Jawi, and then suddenly it all turned Roman alphabet and whatnot. So it shows the different ways of percepting certain things, right? And I think it does relate with the experience of Hui Ting's grandmother, at least because she's coming all the way from China, and then she has to start all over again in a different ways of understanding, different ways of society. So language also equates to the question of like citizenship, because when you don't feel belong to a certain sound or certain textual condition, that's a huge gap. That how can you actually be part of it? So that's one thing that I think very important in the conversation as well. And I think even with Yvonne, when she actually speak the language, when we talk about like textual and oral, so it can shows how the glitch actually provide a ruptures on how, like how can we actually capture the the difficulties or the challenges in learning or try to remember certain words or certain things. So I think that's a very interesting trajectory, at least for this project. Yeah, I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but then maybe that's how I perceive the question from you, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, the two panelists. I think one thing, my colleague One Thing just raised her hand. Yes, please open your mic. Thank you. Yeah, One Thing.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting presentation, and your elaborations, your interpretations of the research findings also are equally fascinating. I'd like to, I came in, I must admit that I came in a bit late, 15 minutes late. I may miss what you presented about. What about the processes of selecting the participants? I know that it's a limited resources. So then you have around 6 of them between 25 to 31 years old. Are they all coming from quite a similar background, or they are very diverse? First question. My second question, as what Paul said in the morning, just now, that the morning talks also really, really interesting and inspiring. And the speaker also mentions about capturing emotions. So I'd like to hear from your observation. How could this project actually interpret or capture the emotions of the participants? And how different it is? Will it be different, or will it be adding some more insights to it? And last, I heard about the recording, the audio, the mother and the daughter, they are speaking to each other. I find that that kind of conversation, it seems like the mother wasn't aware that the kind of sadness that reside in her daughter's space. Yeah. So to me, like, wow, it's interesting. It's also a healing process. I hear it as a healing process for both. So what is your could be your observations about that, like conversation between the family, and how often I see the photo, yeah, from the website, the participant attended. Do you mean the family, they all attended the session? I'm not really sure about the process. That's all. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Maybe I can pick up the first question regarding the process of selecting the participant. I'm going to share. So this is our. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
so basically, this is the table that we actually produce for our paper. So this is the background of all our participants, and we also included their experience of producing sound recordings, because, for example, with Alena, she's actually working as a producer, so she's quite well versed in producing sounds recording. But for most of our participants, this is their first time, and even interestingly, maybe later Jude can actually share. And this is their first time actually talking about their experience with the family. So this is also a very interesting, very important nuances that we actually explore from this particular project. And in terms of the diversity or the demography that we managed to collaborate in this project, it's quite diverse in a way that most of them coming from a different gender, ethnicity, but mostly they are based in Klang Valley in Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we aware of from this particular project, with the first phase of the project. Yeah, apart from that, in terms of the open call, we received maybe around 15 different like proposal, things that they want to explore together with the family. But then the 6 people that we choose is the one who actually resonate in with our teams. Yeah, maybe just briefly about that. Maybe Aizuddin can add more.
Yeah, so I can add to the last question that you had, one thing about the participants. So the participants who attended the workshop were the ones who produced the essay. So their family did not attend the workshop. After the participants attended the workshop, they then went back to do the process of interviewing with their selected family members. But the workshop was a space for them to hear some experience of people having engaged in the work of oral history interviewing and sound kind of arts, and also an opportunity for them to exchange ideas about what they want to explore with their family members once they then go back to spend a few months to do that. In terms of your other 2 questions about emotions and healing, if the audio essays, many of them are actually quite emotional, both in terms of the participants, but also their family members themselves. And then an example that comes to mind is Elena's essay, where she talks to her mother about her mother's experience growing up in Sarawak, in Siburan. And in the essay itself, you can hear how her mother is very emotional, kind of explaining the hardships that she went through trying to get an education because she came from a very poor family. And then upon reflection, a lot of our participants also found that the experience was very emotional for them. Sometimes, as Zikri mentioned, listening to these stories for the very first time. So it also quite a new knowledge for them to learn about family history that perhaps they had not experienced before. In terms of your observation about it being a healing process, there is quite a lot of work, particularly within kind of feminist approaches to interviewing, that consider these kind of spaces to be quite therapeutic spaces, when people are able to have an audience, even if that audience is just another member of their family, to share certain parts of their lives that they have not perhaps considered to be as important, or did not think that other people would find important. It becomes a space, a emotionally charged space, which is quite therapeutic for both the participants and their family members. And I think that was quite the case for many of our participants. It's quite interesting. Some of the participants also said that they regretted not doing something like this much sooner, because for some of their family members, perhaps some aspects of memory has deteriorated, or people are no longer able to remember certain details. But I think on the whole, many of them felt like it was a meaningful experience to have this kind of sound capsule of some aspect of their family history that is now able to be shared in a much more wider way with other people, who might then find connections and resonances with their own family history or with their own experiences.
Thank
And I
you.
think
Yeah.
just to add on that, I think most of our participants actually, like when they actually reflect on the process, they are also aware that it's quite hard for us to actually interview our own family members. It's not as easy. We are interviewing outsiders, which is a very interesting dynamic. Why is it like that? I think maybe because it's very much a very cathartic kind of experience for most of them. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your response to all my questions. If I may allow to ask one last question to both of you as the researcher in this project. So what has changed on you before and after this project? If you may share one or two insights. Thank you.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Maybe me and Zikri, we haven't explicitly reflected on this ourselves. I think for me, because my background is in education, so one thing that I have, which I suspected, but one thing I think is affirmed by the empirical evidence, is that memories can become a source of pedagogy, that people can learn through memory, right? And I think that is a very powerful thing. When, of course, people can learn through memory all the time. You talk to your family members, or people, elder generations share stories. But I think what this project does is give people a framework to then try to make sense of those memories through narration, or try to produce some kind of tangible memorabilia from these experiences of their family, which I think is a very powerful thing that they have. Even if not a lot of people listen to their audio essays, a lot of them say, we have this thing now that which we can then share with our own children, or our other family members. So I think for me that has been quite a valuable thing, and encourages me to maybe try to think of ways that we can expand this project to other people who might find value in it. Zikri?
Yeah, maybe for me, I think it's Hui Ting's pieces, where she did mention on how, like, after the 13 May riot and whatnot, the family actually have to move, or being placed in a social housing, in a flat somewhere near Chowket area or Pudu area, if I'm not mistaken. So it actually captures the certain dynamics of how social housing, urbanization process, and like the very important moment within the country actually provide those kind of spaces. Where do they belong actually, in this kind of like different socialization process in the aftermath of the racial riot? So that's one thing that I actually very much engaging with, because I've heard about how people were being displaced, were being evicted from certain area in Kuala Lumpur, but this is my first time actually getting to know that, her stories actually reaffirm the process of being, not to say just being displaced, but being incorporated into a larger developmental process within the country through social housing project, for example. Yeah.
Okay, there is one question from Dunita from the School of Humanities. She asked, she said, congratulations, Dr. Aizuddin and Zikri, on this project. And would you mind sharing the challenges you encountered while conducting the interview? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I guess we can maybe recap on the challenges that our participants experienced in the interview, which they shared with us. So essentially in the project, the participants conducted the oral history interviews with their families, and after they produced their audio essays, then Zikri and myself, we also interviewed them in order for them to be able to have some space to reflect on their experience. And during our interview with them, what they've told us is, perhaps like Zikri mentioned earlier, how it's quite surprising that it's actually quite challenging to interview your own family member. And we discussed about the kind of techniques that people use when they conduct oral history, particularly with kind of close members of their family. So it's really difficult to do it in a way that is very formal, where you sit down and you have a recording device and you go through a list of questions. It becomes quite performative, or kind of a bit staged. So oftentimes people will try to engage with the interview process in as casual a way as possible. So it's either because I've also conducted some of this work myself, and I also in the process had interviewed my own mother. And sometimes when we interview our family members, they feel like, how do you want me to answer the question? They are as if sometimes they are asking if what they are saying is the right thing, when you just want to hear what they want to say. You're not really interested in them packaging the answer in a way that can be considered to be favorable or things like that. So I think the challenges is to overcome perhaps sometimes the artificial nature of conducting interviews as part of research, because people sometimes feel like they need to satisfy the interviewer, or they want to answer in a way that is as coherent as possible. And so we talked a lot about that with our participants, about what was the experience trying to interview your family members. How did you engage in that interview? I remember one of our participants, Jun Hong, said that he conducted the interview while he was in the car while he was traveling to go to do tomb sweeping as part of the Qingming festivities. So it's trying to get to that conversation in a very natural way. So you're driving somewhere, you have a conversation, as opposed to sitting down, like we're going to do an interview now, which might feel quite nervous for the participants. So some of those conversations were happening.
I think, of course, the question of languages, because some of them actually do the interviews in like different languages, and then they have to translate. They have to like really make sense of everything. Even from Yvonne, for example, we can see like how she tried to capture all the nuances within like 5 to 6 minutes kind of audio essay that she produced. And apart from that, I think just to build on what Aizuddin shared is, of course, the question of how people perform themselves during interviewing process. That's one thing. But then the question of consent as well. Because when you actually interview people who are very much like close to you, so people going to ask like, should I sign everything, like, because these kind of stories, supposedly we assume it as being, or it should be inherited within the family members. But then with this kind of approach, with this kind of the project, it shows that what sort of consent should we pursue when the stories is actually supposedly being inherited. So that's one of the very interesting understanding, even for me as a researcher, as a writer, try to understand. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Prof. Azrina just raised her hand. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to turn on my mic. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing the project. Sorry about my voice. I do find that the personal story is very powerful and evocative. My question is this, the backdrop or the background of your study, the way you had explained it, is national development. And one of you, I think Mr. Zikri, quoted the work of Rahman Embo on Malaysia's development state agenda, whatever you want to call it. Now, my question is, how much of this knowledge on Malaysia's development agenda do the participants have? And were they encouraged, quote unquote, to explore these themes? Because for me, when I hear your interpretations of their stories, the themes that you shared with us, that emerge from their storytelling, their memories, especially concerning belonging, identity, those two are very, very powerful to me. I do find that nation building may be a more interesting lens or backdrop to interpret these stories rather than national development. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. That's a very interesting question. To the first part of your question, when our participants had conducted their interviews, afterwards, what they did was they produced these, what we call audio essays of short 5 to 10 minutes. And in the process of developing that narration of whatever their family members had told them, we encouraged them to try to relate those very intimate family stories to wider kind of knowledges and trends about development, right? So for instance, in Yvonne's audio essay called Lost in Trilingualism, Yvonne then tried to make sense of how her own family history of inheriting or disinheriting language had to do with, say, the language policies inherent in education acts and education policies throughout history. And similarly with the other audio essays as well, how can they try to link their intimate stories to these wider kind of knowledges that we have about development that are embedded or codified through, say, policy or historical narratives. So there is that that dimension to kind of exploring knowledges about development. In terms of the second part of your question, which I find to be quite interesting, and I haven't necessarily thought about nation building as a distinctly kind of separate analytical lens. Our selection of the notion of development was very much a lot to do with, particularly for me, because of my interest in the relationship between education and national development, is to trace kind of these historical accounts of how the country has developed essentially through multiple dimensions, either economic, cultural, or social. But in my very limited understanding of nation building, I think perhaps that is much more a question of kind of identity as opposed to these kind of more kind of sociological accounts of development, which is where we had cited the work of Prof. Rahman.
Thank you so much. It actually reminded me of my time with my late father, you know, who would tell me stories of, my grandparents were teen miners, so he was telling us stories of what it was like growing up, and he would read to us the Light comic book, and he said Light's story is his life story. So yeah, so thank you so much.
Zikri, would you like to add anything?
I think I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. I wonder, Prof. Asrina, is your grandfather still around? Perhaps if he's still around, perhaps you can do an oral
Unfortunately, they are long gone. Long gone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Paul, hi.
Yeah.
Soon.
Yes. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for this very interesting project that you're conducting. When we talk about this national development, and I would like just know that with all those stories that have been told and been documented, is there a specific themes that you would like to sort of bring out as a counter narratives towards our so-called official histories that we are, students are learning as well? I mean, it seems like, it's very interesting that you have various perspectives and or walks of life, talks about different topics and discussions. But what then is the end direction that you would like to go, of the project you are working on? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. For the pilot, at least, we were quite broad in terms of our scope of national development, and that was quite purposeful because we wanted really to learn from the participants what these kind of themes and threads could be like. So we didn't really go in with a presupposed theme of what we wanted to explore. Although, of course, in our conversation with me and Zikri, we had thought about kind of future projects where perhaps there could be much more specific focuses of development that we might want to trial using this methodology. So for instance, we might, for example, want to work with communities that have suffered through a displacement as a result of development, for instance, and then utilize this methodology to help tell those kinds of stories. But for the pilot, at least, we really were curious to know what would come up from the pitches of the participants. But hopefully in the future, there will be opportunities for us to hopefully do a little bit of both. One is to expand to capture much more diverse and varied stories of development, but two, also consider how this methodology can be used to explore with a bit more precision particular themes of development that we are interested to work on. But perhaps Zikri has things to add to that perspective.
Do you have anything to add, Zikri? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think for us, of course, like for the future trajectory of the project, it is a question of like diversifying what sorts of legacies or memories being shared between family members, because sometimes it can be a very private perspective, but then how can we actually convey within a very, how to say, in a popular dissemination, at least through our role within PSR, where we try to promote like public history. So I think that's how we position the project itself within like in the near future. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to to your project. Yeah. So just one quick question. So if I would like to know more about your projects, so do I go to Pusat Rakyat, or where can I have access to your
Yeah,
your work?
I actually just shared it earlier. I will reshare it later. Pusat Sejarah Rakyat actually has a website, and then this whole Suara Pembangunan, the fruit of their project has already been uploaded and archived in Pusat PSR's website. Okay. Actually, I'm also a member of our PSR. Yeah. And any other questions or
Oh, and
comments?
maybe to add to that as well, we are also at the moment trying to write an academic paper based on this presentation. So it's undergoing peer reviews. Hopefully, it will come out at some point in the year.
Wow, looking forward to it. Meanwhile, I noticed that what has been put up on the PSR website, like including the audio that you just shared with us while presenting, I noticed that there are some, you have inserted some interesting sound as well, background sound. I wonder what is the process of editing? Did the participant, the 6 participants also got involved in editing, or how did you make choices of this mixture of sound? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So the participants mainly drove the process of making these essays. So they are the ones who first, during our workshop, kind of brainstorm very general ideas of what they wanted to work on with their family. And then they went off to do the the oral history interviews. In that process, some of them found that their stories have shifted when they are in their conversations with their family members. And after conducting those interviews, then they developed the narrative of the 5 to 10 minute audio essays, which included their own kind of narration plus the snippets of the conversations in that audio essay. What we did was that we had a session during that production process where we asked them to prepare like a draft of what their essay might sound like. And then among the participants, we shared it around and people gave each other feedback and comments on how they might kind of tweak or expand certain ideas. And then they produced kind of the final product, which is what they made themselves. So we were not really involved in the process of kind of changing anything about their essays, particularly because I think it's important for them to have ownership over the story they wanted to tell, and that they are able to do that for themselves. One thing we did ask them during our interviews after the production was what was their own processes in trying to develop these essays. It was quite an interesting conversation of, sometimes they will raise kind of technical issues around how they recorded things or how they found kind of sound mediums that they also wanted to include as backdrop. Sometimes it's more about their dilemmas about what to use in terms of what their family has told them. Many of the participants actually have recorded much more than what they actually included in their audio essays. So we were encouraging them to think about what else would you want to do with all this knowledge that you gain from your conversation with your family members. So some of them have thought about maybe doing other kinds of artistic projects with the material that they collected, or to kind of take the project in a different direction, and that's kind of entirely up to them. But yeah, we did have quite interesting conversations about process, which we were also quite curious to learn about. And all of them had quite kind of different kind of approaches based on their what they had, and also what kind of familiarity they had technical.
Thank you. There is a very important perspective as well, which is also discussed this morning about ownership of data, or ownership of all these stories that we have collected through research. Who actually owns it? And yeah, I like the idea that a more ethical kind of like research, we should allow the participants to have access to their own story rather than researchers acting like extracting or mining for data, treating people like you know, just for for us to extract their stories. Huh? Any other questions from the participants and audience? Or Zikri, would you like to add anything in relation
Maybe
to
just
the...
a little bit on the process. I think we also,
Yes, yeah.
throughout the conversation that we had with our participant, we also encourage a lot of like utilizing open source audio archive. And surprisingly, of course, like maybe in the, how to say, like in the northern region, like in the global north, it's quite easy for them to get certain sound. But then for us, we don't have enough like sound tidbits, you know, like sounds of like everyday people talking in a restaurant or in the kopitiam, for example. So we do encourage, we are envisioning this sort of project also try to have like a, how to say, like a very everyday sound kind of archive. For example, I think with Nadia, one of our collaborators, she did actually have a sound of like a, apa tu? The insects.
Crickets.
Yeah, crickets. Which is very interesting. It's a random sound that she collected and she didn't even know that she's going to use it, but she's using it. And even like the sound of a rain and everything. So I think this sort of project actually encouraged not necessarily just the everyday intergenerational history within the family. It's also of how can we actually expand the sound archive within this region as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, I really enjoy when listening to it because it feels like this is apart from being an oral history, it's also very artistic the way it has been produced. You know, with all this background, everyday kind of like sound that we are so familiar with. Yeah, that's how I experience it. Yeah, and perhaps one final question regarding, you know, that has been repeatedly talked about, that this oral history and sound can be a very transformative kind of like tool of research. And it is transformative not only for the participants, but perhaps for the researcher as well, because both of you have already talked about it. What about the narrators who share the story? I mean, the parents or the family members that the participants have interviewed. How is it? How are they received by these participants? The participants' family members. Did they share with their you know, their family members, and how do their family members think about this project? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. I think there are a lot of kind of different degrees of how they have kind of communicated the outcome of their audio essays to their family members. Some have shared kind of directly. Some of them have said, "Oh, I'm going to do something with this interview. Don't worry about it." You know, like very kind of casually. It's quite interesting in terms of the conversations. One thing I do remember is that one of our participants, Alena, said that her mother was very emotional when she listened to the final product about her audio essay growing up in Sarawak. And then I think that in itself, the kind of listening to how your experiences are narrated back to you is a very therapeutic experience as well for these participants. And also, like I said, that they found, because in the process of the interview, some of the participants said that their family members are quite skeptical about the value of their stories for other people. So they said, who wants to listen to what I have to say about some of these experiences, right? So I think when they are aware that, you know, that these very personal stories can be actually quite meaningful, it can also be for them quite a meaningful experience to see those stories reflected back to them. So there's a wide range of kind of responses or approaches that our participants have taken in terms of sharing the essays to their family. Basically has things to add to that as well.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have. I cannot recall any of the yet, but then maybe in the yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If no, perhaps I will let the two panelists to have a few words as a conclusion of today's conversation.
Thank you for attending and for engaging, and please feel free to visit our page where you can listen to all the 6 audio essays that our participants have worked really hard on and hope to be disseminated widely. And feel free to let us know if you are interested to learn more or to collaborate.
Do you
For
have
your
final
unmute.
words? Yeah.
Yeah, of course, like, thank you so much for the opportunity to share about our project and like the ideas, the whole idea of the project is really about diversifying different ideas about development, because sometimes, for example, even the sound of like people moving from one place to another is something that we didn't really capture, that we didn't really, how to say, put much attention to. But then maybe hopefully through this particular project, we can actually try to capture, like all the nuances of sound that we experience every day. Hopefully. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the end of today's conversation. Thanks everyone for attending this afternoon's conversation. And for USM staff and students, I'm going to share a QR code for your attendance. So